the snow came without warning. A quiet thief in the grey afternoon. Elias watched it from the cabin window, a pale curtain descending over the pines. For 5 years, the seasons had turned like this. Silent. Unchanging. He was a man carved from the silence, his thoughts worn smooth as river stones. The wind began to keen, a low mournful sound that worked its way through the chinking in the log walls. He stoked the fire. Sparks danced up the stone chimney, a brief, violent life against the coming dark. His routine was an anchor. Wood. Water. Traps. The rhythm of it kept the ghosts at bay. The ghost of a small laugh. The ghost of a lullaby sung off-key. He placed the kettle on the iron stove, the hiss of it filling the small room. Outside, the world was being erased. White on white. Then came the sound. Not the wind. Not the crack of a frozen branch. A soft, heavy thud against the door. He froze, hand on the kettle. Nothing came to this door. Nothing had in 5 years. He took the rifle from its pegs above the mantel. The wood was smooth in his calloused hands. He didn't check if it was loaded. It was always loaded. He moved to the door, the floorboards groaning under his weight. He pulled back the heavy bar, the wood scraping a protest. He opened the door a crack. The wind tore at it, a physical blow. A shape lay huddled on his porch, a mound of white that was not just snow. He opened the door wider. It was a woman, her face pale as birch bark, her black hair stark against the drift she had become. In her arms, she clutched a bundle of rags, a small, still thing. He saw the flutter of her eyelids. She was alive. He said nothing. There were no words for this. He lowered the rifle, leaned it against the wall, and stepped out into the blizzard's teeth. He carried her inside. She was lighter than a doe, a collection of sharp angles and cold desperation. He laid her on the cot by the fire, the one that had been empty for so long. The bundle in her arms whimpered, a thin, reedy sound almost lost in the howl of the wind. A baby. He stared at it, a knot tightening in his chest. He pulled the wet shawl from her shoulders. Her clothes were thin, city clothes, useless against the mountain's fury. Bruises marbled the skin of her arm, dark and ugly. He looked away. He took the baby from her limp grasp. It was small, its face pinched and blue with cold. He unwrapped the damp rags. A boy. He wrapped the infant in a drywall blanket from his chest and held him close to the stove, rubbing the tiny limbs with a rough finger. The baby's cries grew stronger, angrier. A good sound. A living sound. The woman on the cot stirred, her eyes fluttering open. They were dark, deep, and filled with a terror that went beyond the cold. Her gaze locked on the baby in his arms. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She pushed herself up on one elbow, a gasp of pain escaping her. He saw her eyes dart around the cabin, taking in the rifle by the door, the sparse furniture, the single window buried in snow. He walked over and placed the warm, squirming bundle back in her arms. Her hand closed around the baby with a desperate strength. She did not look at him. She looked only at the child. He went back to the stove. He ladled stew into a bowl. It was venison and root vegetables, thick and hot. He set it on the small crate beside the cot. She didn't move. He sat in his chair across the room, watching the fire, giving her the silence. Hours passed. The storm raged. The stew grew cold. The blizzard held them for 3 days. A white prison. The world was the cabin, the roar of the wind, the crackle of the fire. She did not speak. He did not ask. Their communication was a thing of gesture and observation. When the baby cried, he would leave a tin of canned milk and a pan of boiled water on the hearth. She would feed the child, her movements deft and practiced, her eyes never leaving its face. She ate the stew when he was outside, checking the woodpile, his back turned to the window. He would come back in, shaking snow from his coat, and the bowl would be empty on the crate. He slept in his chair, the rifle across his lap. Not for her. For the shadows that crept in with the storm. On the second day, she got up. She moved stiffly, her body a map of hidden pains. She took the empty bowl to the wash basin and cleaned it with a quiet efficiency. He watched her from the corner of his eye. She was small, but there was a straightness to her spine. A resilience. She found the broom and swept the floor, her motions rhythmic, contained. She was creating order in the small space, claiming a piece of it for herself. He found a small wooden crate and sanded its edges smooth. He lined it with an old, clean sheepskin. He placed it near the stove. A makeshift cradle. He did not look at her as he did it. He felt her gaze on his back. Later, when the baby slept, she placed him gently into the box. Her hand rested on the edge for a long moment. It was the closest they had come to an exchange. The wind howled. The fire popped. The baby slept. A fragile peace settled in the heart of the storm. He looked at his hands, at the scars crisscrossing his knuckles. He remembered carving a different cradle, long ago. The memory was a dull ache, a wound that never fully healed. On the fourth morning, the world was silent. The wind had died. Sunlight, brilliant and blinding, streamed through the window, reflecting off a landscape of impossible white. Elias pulled on his boots. The stillness felt strange, louder than the storm. He opened the door. The snow was drifted to the eaves. He began to dig a path. The work was hard, his breath pluming in the frigid air. The rhythmic scrape of the shovel was the only sound. After an hour, he felt her presence behind him. She stood in the doorway, the baby held tight against her chest. She had found one of his old wool shirts and it hung on her small frame, the sleeves rolled up. She watched him work, her expression unreadable. He kept digging. He cleared a path to the woodpile, then to the smokehouse. He did not look back at her, but he knew she was still there. When he finished, he stacked fresh logs on the porch. He went back inside. She had coffee on the stove. It was his coffee, from his tin, but she had made it. She poured 2 mugs. She handed one to him. Her fingers brushed his. They were cold. He took the mug. Their eyes met for the first time. He saw the exhaustion in them, the fear still lingering deep inside. But he saw something else, too. A flicker of resolve. He nodded once, a small, stiff gesture. He took a sip of the coffee. It was strong, black. Just how he liked it. She watched him drink it before turning to look out the door at the bright, silent snow. The world was clean. New. For a moment, the past was buried. For a moment, there was only the cabin, the sun on the snow, and the shared warmth of the coffee in their hands. The silence between them had shifted. It was no longer the silence of strangers. It was something else. Something being built. Life found a new rhythm. Days were marked by work. He hunted. He chopped wood. He mended the fences that poked up through the snow. She cared for the baby. She cooked. She cleaned the cabin until the old wood gleamed. She mended his clothes with small, neat stitches he had not seen in years. She was a quiet, constant presence in the landscape of his solitude. He learned her movements, the soft pad of her feet on the floorboards, the way she hummed a tuneless, wordless song to the baby. He left a rabbit by the door one morning. When he returned, it was skinned, cleaned, and simmering in the pot. He found a small bird she had carved from a piece of kindling, its wings outstretched, left on the mantelpiece. It was intricate, delicate. A message he did not need words to understand. One evening, as he was oiling his rifle by the firelight, she spoke. Her voice was quiet, rough from disuse. He will look for me. Elias did not stop his work. He ran the oily rag down the barrel, his movement slow, deliberate. He did not ask who. He knew. Men like that always looked. They saw people as property. "This place is hard to find," he said. It was the most he had said at one time since she arrived. "He is hard," she replied. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and final. She stood by the window, looking out at the moonlit snow. "He gave me this." She touched a faint scar on her temple, almost hidden by her hair. For dropping a plate, Elias set the rifle down. He looked at her back, at the rigid line of her spine. He saw the ghost of another woman, one with laughter in her eyes and flour on her hands. A ghost a different kind of man had taken from him. Not with fists, but with a wagon that went too fast on a slick road. The loss was the same. A hole in the world. He understood. Weeks turned into a month. The snow began to recede, showing patches of dark earth. The river swelled, its roar a constant presence at the edge of the clearing. She walked by its bank sometimes, the baby strapped to her chest in a sling she had fashioned from a blanket. Elias watched her from a distance. He saw the tightness in her shoulders begin to ease. He saw her point things out to the baby, a hawk circling high overhead, a deer at the salt lick. The boy was growing, his cries turning to gurgles and coos. He had his mother's dark eyes. One afternoon, Elias came back from checking his traplines to find her weeping. It was a silent, desperate grief, her shoulders shaking as she knelt by the makeshift cradle. He stopped in the doorway, uncertain. He had never seen her cry. He backed away, leaving her to it, and went to split wood. The sound of the axe was a sharp, percussive counterpoint to her silent sorrow. He worked until his arms ached, until the sun dipped below the peaks. When he came inside, she was calm. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her face was composed. The cabin was clean. Supper was on the stove. Nothing was said. But he knew something had broken in her. A dam of unshed tears. The next day, she spoke again. "My son," she said, looking at the sleeping baby. "His name is Wei." Elias nodded. "Wei," he repeated. The name felt solid in the quiet room. "Mine is Elias." She met his gaze. "I know," she said. "It is carved on the axe." Later that week, he found her looking at the empty spot on the wall where a framed photograph used to hang. He had taken it down 5 years ago. He had burned it in this very fireplace. He could still feel the heat. "You had a family," she stated. It was not a question. "Yes," he said. And that was all. The thaw brought the mud. And it brought him. Elias saw the horse first, a speck moving slowly through the lower valley. He watched it for an hour through his spyglass. A single rider. Big man. Moving with a relentless purpose. He did not need to be told who it was. He lowered the spyglass, the cold metal pressing into his skin. He went back to the cabin. Lynn was outside, hanging washed clothes on a line strung between 2 pines. She saw the look on his face. Her hand stilled. Her face went pale. All the softness that had begun to gentle her features vanished, replaced by a stark, familiar terror. "Go inside," he said, his voice flat. "Get the boy." She didn't argue. She ran into the cabin, a frantic urgency in her movements. Elias went to the barn. He returned not with the rifle, but with a shovel. He began to dig in the soft earth near the woodpile. He didn't hurry. His movements were steady, methodical. Each shovelful of dirt was a deliberate act. Lynn came to the doorway, Wei clutched in her arms. She watched him dig. He was not digging a grave. He was digging a fighting position. A shallow trench behind the solid wall of stacked logs. He worked until the sun was low, until the rider was no longer a speck but a clear shape at the edge of the trees. He went inside. He took the rifle from its pegs. He checked the action. He looked at Lynn. Her eyes were wide, but her hands were steady on the baby. "The root cellar," he said. He had shown it to her weeks ago, the small, dark space under the floorboards where he kept his stores. "Stay there. Do not make a sound. No matter what you hear." She nodded, her throat working. She kissed her son's forehead, a quick, desperate press of her lips. Then she disappeared under the floor. Elias dragged the heavy table to cover the trapdoor. He went to the window and waited. The man rode into the clearing as if he owned it. He was large, thick in the shoulders and neck, with a face made of blunted features. He swung down from the horse, his boots sinking into the mud. He surveyed the cabin, a look of arrogant possession on his face. He hitched his horse to the rail and strode to the door, not bothering to knock. He simply kicked it open. The wood splintered around the latch. Elias was sitting at the table, the rifle laid across it, pointing at the empty doorway. The man, Cole, filled the frame. His eyes were small and mean. They swept the cabin, lingering on the makeshift cradle by the fire, then settled on Elias. "Old man," he grunted. "Where is she?" Elias didn't move. His hands were steady on the table. "Nobody here but me," Cole laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Don't lie to me. I tracked her to this mountain. Saw the smoke from your chimney for 2 days. She's mine. The boy, too. I want my property back." He stepped inside, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "She ain't property," Elias said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And she ain't here." Cole's eyes narrowed. He took another step, his gaze sweeping the room again. He saw the second mug on the wash basin. He saw the small, carved bird on the mantel. A sneer twisted his lips. "You're a dead man, old-timer." He went for his gun. He was fast. But Elias was not sitting where he had been a second before. He had overturned the table, the heavy oak crashing to the floor as Cole drew his pistol. The first shot went wild, splintering the wall above Elias's head. Elias fired the rifle from the floor. The sound was deafening in the small cabin. Cole staggered back, a look of stunned surprise on his face. He clutched his shoulder, blood welling between his fingers. He raised his pistol again, his face contorted in rage. Elias fired a second time. The shot hit Cole in the chest. He dropped the pistol. He fell to his knees, then pitched forward onto the floorboards. Silence descended. Heavy. Final. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. Elias stayed behind the overturned table for a long time, the rifle still hot in his hands. The silence in the cabin was absolute. Outside, a bird began to sing, oblivious. He finally rose, his joints stiff. He walked over to the body. He looked down at the man's face, at the vacant stare. He felt nothing. No triumph. No regret. Only a vast, weary emptiness. He knew what came next. He picked up the man's pistol. He went to the trap door and pushed the broken table aside. He lifted the heavy door. Lynn was huddled in the darkness below, her body curled around Wei, her hand clamped over his mouth. Her eyes were wide in the gloom, reflecting the sliver of light from the cabin. He reached a hand down to her. "It's done," he said. She took his hand. He pulled her up. She emerged into the light, blinking, her face streaked with dirt and tears. She looked at the body on the floor, her expression a mixture of terror and disbelief. Then she looked at Elias. She said nothing. She didn't have to. He saw it in her eyes. The end of a long nightmare. Together, they worked. They dragged the body outside. They wrapped it in the man's own bedroll. Elias saddled the man's horse. He tied the body across the saddle. He took the reins and led the horse down the mountain path, into the deep woods where things get lost. He came back just before dawn, exhausted. Lynn was waiting for him. The body was gone from the floor. The blood was scrubbed from the boards. The broken door was propped shut. A pot of coffee was hot on the stove. She handed him a mug, her hands not shaking. They stood in the quiet cabin, watching the sun rise, the light spilling over the jagged peaks. A new day. A clean slate. The world felt bigger, the silence lighter. Summer came to the mountain. The valley turned green, life settled into a new, quieter rhythm. The fear was gone. In its place, something tentative and fragile began to grow. They spoke more. Not much, but enough. She told him her name was Lynn. She told him about the city she had fled, the life she had been forced into. He told her about his wife, Sarah. About their daughter, Lily, who had her mother's smile. He spoke of the accident on the pass, the snow, the wagon. He told her how the silence had descended on his life. He found he could speak of it without the old, crushing weight. He was telling a story, not reliving a nightmare. He took the old cradle from the barn, the one he had built for Lily. He cleaned it and oiled the wood until it shone. He set it by the fire. Lynn moved way into it that night. One afternoon, he went to town. It was the first time in a year. He came back with supplies, flour, salt, seeds for a garden. He also brought back a piece of paper. A form. He found her by the river, watching Way splash his hands in the shallows. He stood beside her, looking at the water rush over the stones. For the boy, he said, holding out the paper. A name. Protection. She looked at the paper. It was a marriage license. She looked at him, her dark eyes searching his face. He met her gaze, his own steady. This was not about love, not the way the songs and stories told it. It was about something harder, truer. It was about sanctuary. About two broken people forging a shelter against the world. It was about a boy needing a father's name in a world that was unkind to women and children alone. She nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. Elias, she said, her voice soft but clear. It was an acceptance. A promise. A beginning. They stood by the river as the sun set, the three of them a small, unlikely constellation against the vast, wild backdrop of the mountains. The silence was not empty anymore. It was full.